All right, Fred, welcome to the show, man. I'm super stoked to have you here finally.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, like we were talking before we hit record, I've been a big fan of Tortuga, which is your bag company for a long time. And if anybody who's been following me for a while knows, I'm a nerd about like bags and product design, that kind of stuff. So you were actually one of the very first people that I was like, I want to have Fred from Tortuga on the podcast when I was starting it way back when. So this is kind of like a little bit of like a dream come true to have you on here. So thanks for agreeing to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
So let's start off with this. Before we hit record, you were telling me that you are, normally you live in the Bay Area, as far as I know, and currently you're building out an Airbnb in Joshua Tree. And I'm curious because in the news, there's been a lot of talk around people moving out of San Francisco and sort of spreading out to other cities in the US just because like everyone's working remotely and all of a sudden they're finding out, hey, I can go live in this other location, keep my job in San Francisco and bring my costs lower. What do you think about that? Is that something that you're sort of thinking about doing as well? Like, what has been your feeling and your personal experience from that as somebody who is from the Bay Area?
Yeah, I've been all over the place. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania, kind of near Pittsburgh, so not too far from where I understand you make your base part of the year. And yeah, I guess I moved out of San Francisco, lived there originally out of college, kind of got my first job, moved there. I moved out in 2015, I think, something like that. Traveled for like a couple months, came back, moved to Oakland. I've sort of like been moving farther east in the Bay Area. So right now I've been living in kind of the suburbs of the East Bay. So I guess for other reasons, kind of already made one of the transitions that is happening now, which is people moving from a city to a suburb, whether it's outside of the city they were living in or elsewhere, where maybe it's a little cheaper for them, maybe they get more space, whatever. But because they're now working remotely or sometimes remotely, like hybrid kind of setup, they don't mind more of a commute. So in the Bay Area, you even hear stories of people moving to like Napa and wine country, which is like an hour away, but they only have to go into the office once a week. Maybe they don't mind that drive. That lifestyle trade-off is worthwhile for them. And now we're seeing it in places like I'm down in Joshua Tree right now. So places where that are very beautiful. People want to live for whatever the nature, lifestyle, whatever, but places that just didn't have jobs, so you couldn't really live here. And that typically will correlate with a place that is often much cheaper. So even though Joshua Tree is a cool kind of artistic little town, gorgeous national park here, all that, the cost of housing is much less than in most of California. You see this, not cost of housing isn't super low, but you see this a bit in like Tahoe, where Lake Tahoe, gorgeous. People love to live up there in the summer. It's super nice. In winter, you get the skiers. So places like that where people would live part-time or just go up on the weekends before, maybe at a vacation house if they could afford it. Suddenly that's a place you could just live full-time, and it's gorgeous, great lifestyle there. And there's starting to be more jobs. But if you work remotely, suddenly that the local job scene doesn't really matter. So that's kind of the interesting one to me. And I think we'll see, we're starting to see a little bit of boom or increased growth in nicer suburbs where people want to live. That's also partially just millennials are hitting the age where they're having families and buying homes. So that was probably going to happen anyway. The kind of interesting one, which will probably be a little harder or generate some pushback, is the kind of lifestyle-y destination that just didn't really have jobs before, but now that's kind of out of the equation for a lot of people. Your sort of nature type destination. So those are the interesting ones. I assume there'll be some local pushback, that would drive up housing prices. All kinds of stuff may happen, but it's good to spread people around because we've got a lot of density in cities like San Francisco. We actually need more density, but we have a lot of people there, and it's just like making housing costs a little crazy. So if we can all spread out a little bit, that might help.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what this like rise of remote work does to American sort of society and also politics, just because like all of a sudden you have all these people from cities leaving and going to like more rural areas. So I think it's gonna be really interesting. And it's also been really fun to kind of see it like you can read about things, but then it becomes really interesting when you actually have like personal examples. Like we have friends of ours who were living in New York, went traveling, and then came back and decided to actually buy this cabin in North Carolina. And so they were like, like we work for companies now that don't care where we work. So why not, buy a place in the cabins of North Carolina instead of going to a city? And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's going to be a trend that we're going to see a lot more. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. But I want to go back, to the beginning of Tortuga, because I know I've heard the origin story that you and your co-founder were on a trip, on a backpacking trip to Europe, and you just couldn't find the right backpacks, and you either had to choose between backpacking backpacks or you just couldn't find the right thing. But what I'm curious is, were you entrepreneurially minded before that, and that trip and that experience just sort of pointed you in the right direction of where to spend that entrepreneurial energy? Or did you have no ideas, no concepts? You had never thought about starting your own business before that, and then that was kind of the beginning of everything?
I wanted to start something, but hadn't done anything. So I guess I was saying I was entrepreneurially minded then, but I wasn't taking any actions on it. So I don't know if that makes me a wantrepreneur at the time or not. But yeah, it was something I always said that I wanted to do. Just, I think just some of it is just kind of the personality of like, at first you always think like, oh, I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I'm going to decide, how everything works. It's not exactly how it goes once you're an entrepreneur, but, I had a little bit of that mindset. My dad had started his own business, so I'd seen a little bit of that first person with him. And yeah, by the time we took this trip that kind of gave us the idea for a product, I had been working, I was at Google at the time. I'd been working there like 2 years and change out of college, and was just kind of seeing that the path upward for me there was just stuff I wasn't interested in, like becoming a manager, even though later became one at Tortuga. And I just didn't see like a path or other exciting options there. And I was already kind of like bored in what I was doing. So wanted something different. And then the other piece of it was that Jeremy, my co-founder, we had both just read The 4 Hour Workweek, which at the time was kind of the blueprint that we tried to follow eventually. And helped for us, it helped to connect like something that we wanted with like how to possibly do this thing you don't know how to do. So it kind of bridged that gap between like just vaguely wanting something and trying to figure out, okay, here's how we actually do it. And we tried to use that as kind of our initial blueprint for the business.
So I really relate to this idea that you said of kind of being like a entrepreneur, like you were entrepreneurially minded, but you never really did anything about it. And I was totally that for my entire like late teenage years and my early 20s, where I was like, I knew it was something that I wanted to do, but I just wasn't really taking any action. I wasn't executing on any of the ideas. What was like the push for you to go from, okay, like this is something that I want to do and something that I'm constantly thinking about, to I'm actually going to go out there and do this and start this bag company?
Yeah. So I mentioned I was working at Google and I had hit the point, it was only a couple years in, but I was already just kind of like bored, unhappy. It was just like that kind of malaise you sometimes hit when you're in a job that's like not, you don't love or isn't right for you. And at the time, Google was always number one on those lists of like best places to work. It was before, a lot of the other tech companies had all the same perks and stuff. And I mean, it was a good place. I'm not bashing it, but I was kind of looking at myself and thinking like, this is the number one place to work and I don't like it. That's probably not good. So maybe that means I can't work anywhere, or at least like just switching to a different company wasn't going to be kind of quick fix to the problem. So that's kind of what gave me a greater need, or made me think like this is that I needed to pursue that path rather than just like well, I'll just, switch companies and then, I'll be happy somewhere else or whatever. So that's kind of what gave me the really strong impetus. And then having 4-hour work week, then having a problem that we actually wanted to solve and seemed interesting and fun. So it kind of felt like everything was coming together, and it was like, oh, now suddenly I want to leave, and now I have this toolbox for how to do it. So I better do it. Or otherwise I am the entrepreneur, or I am the person that's just talking about it and not acting on it.
What were the things that, because I totally agree, like Google is one of these places that everybody looks up to, like, oh, and it's like something to put on your resume, right? Like if you can say like, I worked at Google, that's like a big deal. Like I have a friend who designed something and worked for a company that then went on and got funded by Shark Tank. And now it's like all over his resume, because it grabs eyeballs. What were the things that when you were sort of building Tortuga and starting to build out the culture and the way that you guys work at Tortuga, what were some of the things that you had experienced or seen at Google that you said, I don't want to bring over to Tortuga?
So one of my objections when I was at Google was that at least the team I was on, I wasn't an engineer. We're in kind of, we basically worked with advertisers and helped them create their ad campaigns and stuff. So one of the things I saw was like, there wasn't any real path forward for me other than becoming a manager. There wasn't like, you could get a promotion or raise, but you're basically just doing the same job unless you switch to management or went to like a totally different team. And there wasn't a lot of help or transparency in how to totally switch teams or totally kind of switch tracks that you were on. So basically I saw a lot of people who were either just staying in the same job forever, which I didn't want to do, or we're going to management, and that's all I saw. So that was one thing where I didn't want it to be a culture where like you had to become a manager to move up or make more money or have new challenges and, an exciting job that's actually going to engage you and challenge you. And then the other part of it was one of the most common pieces of feedback that I would get from managers, especially after I was there for a couple of years and, was better at my job, was that like I was doing a good job at my job, but I needed to be more visible and the way I would say it, I'm sure they would phrase it differently, but the way I heard it was like, I needed to spend more time talking about what I was doing than doing what I was doing. Because I think when they did promotions and things like that, there were a lot of managers involved in those decisions. Not all of them, knew me or were my manager. So basically I needed to spend time promoting myself to people who I didn't work with so that then they would approve my eventual promotion or whatever. So, I'm sure there's a nicer way to put it, but my like uncharitable version of that is that they wanted me to do I was doing a good job at my job, but I should stop that and spend more time on self-promotion. And I just sort of like fundamentally disagreed with that as an idea. So both of those kind of informed me and made me want to make Tortuga a place where you can like spend as much of your time as possible. Obviously, you have to communicate with other people and stuff, but spend as much of your time as possible on like the deep work, focused work, kind of solving problems. And less time on self-promotion or, talking about what you did rather than doing the work. And then the other one was just making sure that there was a way for people to take on new work, kind of grow their responsibilities, grow in their career, all that stuff without having to become a manager.
So how do you do that? Because I definitely understand that, like you don't want to essentially, like if you enjoy what you do, and the only way for you to progress in your job and how much you make is to essentially go out there and like kind of stop doing what you like doing and have to take on responsibilities you don't necessarily maybe care for. But how do you do that? Like, how did you guys actually put that in place at Tortuga?
So one of the things we stole this from Help Scout. They're remote too. They make like a help desk software, but they had a blog post a while ago about rather than calling it like managers and individual contributors or whatever, they call it players and coaches to better define those roles and make them I think one, just like change the language so you're not saying manager all the time and remove some of the associations there. And then kind of better frame it so that people understand, like, if you're really good at your job, let's say as a player, like a coach is a different job. It's fine to switch. You can switch. Some people want to become managers and go onto that track, but it is a very different job. And if someone is great at being a player, like, we shouldn't force them to become a coach to, continue in their career or make more money or whatever. Like that, it's fine if they want to do that, but you shouldn't have to, because if you do that for people who don't want to be a manager or just aren't great at it, lots of people aren't good at it. So then you're taking out like a great player and forcing them to be a coach for no reason. Like, you're going to hurt yourself doing that, hurt your team, So we installed that framework to like better define it for people, so they kind of understand, like, coaches and players are different. You can choose either track. Like, you can switch, but you can just stay on your track and kind of go up forever in theory. And then tried to make that also helped us like make the manager coach job act as a coach rather than, no one wants a like manager, like a manager. So if your job is a coach, then it's a little clearer that, like, yeah, you have to provide direction for the players and kind of help to organize everyone. But, the players are the stars or something to some degree. So, the coach's job is to help them be great at being players, not to boss them around.
Gotcha. You mentioned the 4-hour work week a little bit ago, which, probably everybody listening to this has heard of. It's sort of like the Bible for digital nomads, so to say. And what's interesting is I know from kind of doing a little bit of research that trip that you took that essentially was the genesis of the idea of Tortuga was right around when, the book came out, '09 or so. And a lot has changed since then. And you've sort of seen those changes actively as somebody participating in the remote economy, building a remote company. And the 4-hour work week coming out is sort of like a big moment in the digital nomad and remote work movement, in my opinion. And similar to that, COVID is another, I think, big chapter in that story, so to say. So looking back at how 4-hour work week impacted everything and the direction that it set in place, what do you think the next 10 years, post COVID are going to look like? How do you think that chapter in the remote work story, so to say, is it going to like affect the direction of where we go?
If you can get the answer to that question right, I think there's a lot of money to be had in knowing the answer or guessing right to that one. Yeah, I don't know. It's so, especially right now, right? We're recording mid-May. It'll be so interesting to see what, there's a bunch of changes, and then some of them are going to stick or be new trends, like big changes in society. And some things are just going to like bounce right back and revert to what they were before. So I think that's the big question, is like, what changes are going to stick? It does seem like at least some of the, a lot more companies are definitely going to be remote and stay that way. I think especially smaller ones. Bigger companies, TBD, I think. I'm in the Bay Area, so a lot of the tech companies are saying that they're going to be remote, or I think Twitter is claiming that they're going to be remote. A lot are saying hybrid, but, it's one thing to say it and it's another to do it. And I think we'll see a lot of people or a lot of companies where they say you can be hybrid or remote, but then, the boss and all the highest ranking people are in the office. So then the next tier down are like, well, if I'm remote, like, they're not going to see me. That's going to be bad for my career. So they go to the office, and then it kind of trickles down. So I think that's the one that's sort of a bigger question mark to me. But I think worst case, we'll see more people allowed to work remotely, even at bigger companies. And, if you're a little bit more established in your career or whatever, you have different priorities, you have a family and you want to be able to be home more and spend more time with them, and are okay, maybe you're trading off some whatever promotion potential or something because you're remote, and a lot of people are in the office. So I think we'll see more flexibility, whether that's hybrid, working remotely a couple of days a week, more people being allowed rather than like a lot of companies have that one person who worked remotely before. I think we'll see more flexibility there, which I think is kind of the ultimate end goal, because then people get to make that choice, right? You want to work, you want the stability or imagined stability of a big company, but you want to work remotely. Great, you can do that. You want to strike out on your own, then that's your option. I think that's, for me, kind of the ideal outcome. That way, people can. To me, remote is like part of being able to build the life that you want. So the more flexibility and options there are out there, I think that's generally the better way. The way we always kind of have talked about at Tortuga, especially when we were recruiting people, is that like you should be able to kind of choose where you live based on what you like, whatever it is. You want to be around your family, you love this big city, you want to be in nature, whatever it is. And then your job and work is kind of can be after that, rather than, well, I have to move to New York City because I want to work in, whatever industry. So I think being able to decouple those things is good. That way you can choose where you want to work, or what kind of work you want to do, what kind of company, all that. You can choose where you want to live, and those can be like discrete decisions. So, you want to work for a big company but live somewhere super remote. Great, you can do it. You want to live in a city and work independently and kind of be on your own, you can do it. I think that flexibility will be great for people.
Yeah, I think what's really important that you mentioned there is this. I think in the past, people who worked remotely were sort of giving up this opportunity to grow within their company, right? Because like you mentioned, like if the boss is in the office and you're not putting in FaceTime with the boss, then, the chances of you getting that promotion or whatever may be kind of drop off. But I think that's what's so important about being like remote, being a part of the culture of the company, because then you're not just this odd person out that's like doing things on their own and a bit rogue. But if the company themselves are remote, if the boss, if the management themselves are saying, hey, you don't need to be here, we're not here, we're not in the offices, then it sort of removes that pull to the office, if that makes sense. Like, I think this flex work thing isn't really going to work out very well if it's like, well, you can work from home if you want, but we're going to be here. Like, I don't really see that working out. I could see the flex work thing working out if it's like I think it's Salesforce that it essentially announced they're converting all of their offices, or what they're keeping as offices, into co-working spaces, and saying like, hey, if you want to come in, Monday, Tuesday, that's fine. This team can come in, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it is. Like, I think that that's kind of possible.
Yeah, I don't know what the percentage as like a tipping point would be, but if you hit a large enough percentage where people are working remotely within any given company, then they stop the remote. People stop being the exception. They stop being at a constant disadvantage. It might still be a little bit of a disadvantage, but it's not like, I think there's a lot of companies where there's one or two people who work remotely. They were whatever, a great employee, but their spouse had to move for something, and they're the exception. But if whatever 20% of your company, or 30, 40, whatever, works remotely at least a bit, then those the remote people can start to like have a voice and be at least at less of a disadvantage.
Mm. Speaking of COVID, obviously COVID affected the travel industry pretty heavily. We couldn't travel a lot, all those sort of things. And like, I'm sure that it affected you guys at Tortuga as well. What were some of the actions that you took in order to make sure that Tortuga made it through this tough period? And like, how has that worked out?
Well, we're still here, so it's worked out well enough so far. But yeah, it was not a good few, I don't know, weeks to a couple months at the beginning of it. We actually just had a team retreat in like mid-February, where it was like a thing we knew about was happening in China or whatever, but didn't seem to be a real threat here yet, or we weren't worried about having a retreat. And then you go home, and a couple weeks later, like, the world shut down. It was kind of wild looking back. But yeah, we had to make a lot of very hard changes and sacrifices. We had to lay off actually most of our team. We used some of the like stimulus government assistance type stuff, partially just to like make sure we had money in the bank, and also we wanted to make sure that any of our outstanding bills and debts and stuff were paid, so that we would maintain good relationships with our vendors. And like, we intended to live through this, so we wanted to make sure that like we didn't burn every bridge in the meantime, just to stay alive. So yeah, we kind of cut costs as quickly as we could. I mean, if you look at the chart of flights, or like people going through TSA, I think is the number they track, but it goes to like practically zero last April or so, and then kind of slowly jumps up a little bit and then plateaus for a while. So that same chart is basically what our sales looked like, or it was like had a nice year in 2019, off to a decent start for 2020, and then all of a sudden like you fall off this cliff. So yeah, we at first we thought like, oh, we might have to make some really hard choices here. This is going to be a really tough time. And then maybe a week after, I was putting out some warnings to the team of like, hey, here's like what we're seeing. We don't totally know what's happening. Like, these are the things that might happen, just to be as transparent as possible. Probably a week later, we had another team call that was like, okay, this is happening and here's what we have to do about it. Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, it's like a manager or coach, like we were discussing, someone being in charge of the business. We were 12 people at the time, so have some responsibility to all these folks. And yeah, it was not a great time to be the manager or the boss. And yeah, had to make had to make a lot of sacrifices. And I'm still with the company, obviously, and a lot of our team is not. So you could say they made greater sacrifices or whatever. But yeah, it was not a good or happy time. Those first couple months were pretty rough, just work wise, aside from everything that's happening in the world.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that isn't just to like force you to like remember that time. It's because I think going through periods of this, it's one of the ways that you recognize new entrepreneurs versus those who've been through a few periods like that, right? Is like, once you go through it once, it makes you more prepared for the next time, right? And you're almost like the way that it's been described to me from some people who've been in business for a long time is you kind of like look at things differently, and like you think about them in a different way. So coming out of that experience, are you walking away with any sort of like lessons or just anything that maybe somebody who's a first time entrepreneur who is, I don't know if you've seen the charts, but there have never been more businesses started than like, this year. So there's a lot of new owners starting up businesses at the moment who aren't going to experience a tough period like this, at least for a little bit. So hopefully for a little bit. So what are, some of those lessons that you walked away from this experience that you would pass on to those people starting businesses now?
So if you're starting a business now, you're pretty much in the same position that we were, because we started in 2009. So, we took this trip that started the business because it was like kind of early on in that recession and flights were really cheap. So we took a trip. So we were basically starting out where like, I didn't think about it at the time, like the larger market, but travel was down, the spending was down, all that sort of stuff. By the time we launched was really like 2011. So, the recovery had kind of started a little bit by then. But, I have seen those stats about like how many successful businesses were started during recessions, because you're basically starting into a headwind. So it's like, if you get some momentum and manage to launch something then you're already showing some resiliency. You're showing there's some need for that product. So if you're starting now and survive a year or two, you're probably in great shape. But if if things look good for the next few years, and it's like all up and to the right for the next few years, it's probably good to remember that it doesn't always stay like that. It happens for a while, and then we have a little cliff. That might be when you zoom out, 2008 suddenly looks like kind of small relative to 2020's dip. But yeah, at some point, like whatever that up and to the right is, it's going to get interrupted. It might be small, might be huge, but it's good to remember that like, it's good to take advantage and spend the money, be aggressive, all that stuff in the good times, but also know that those don't last forever. So, don't assume, you're going to be making more money tomorrow than today. So you can always, take out debt or spend more than you're making or whatever. All the stuff that you can kind of get away with when times are really good, and, each day is better than the last. But at some point that music stops for some amount of time. So it's good to be ready for that. I would say we definitely had the mentality that, we're on a 10-year bull run at that point. So like, just historically, probably we were gonna like have some kind of correction, recession, whatever. Obviously we didn't expect travel to drop
What happened? Yeah.
90% or whatever. So yeah, I mean, for me or for Tortuga, I'm kind of looking at it as like, a good time to learn some lessons, but also if we can survive this, then I don't want to get overconfident, but like, I feel pretty bulletproof. Like any, whatever the next version of this is, it probably won't be as bad. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm going to like jinx myself, but if you can survive a really tough time, or if you're starting a business, you can get off the ground at this point, like, I think that's something to be like proud of and feel good about. And, for sure, pat yourself on the back, but also know that like, uh, you know, you have to be ready for the next one of these, whatever that means in terms of
Mhm.
like, having cash in the bank, managing your debt, all those sort of like big things that like when the music stops, suddenly, the bank suddenly isn't so friendly, or everyone who is generous with terms suddenly needs to be paid. So yeah, it's also a good time to learn like who's a good partner to continue working with, and who's only a partner in the good times. So
Mm.
a lot of lessons to be learned, but yeah, if you're starting out now, awesome, and congrats, and thanks for leading an entrepreneurship boom, which I think we needed.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of travel, like it was definitely travel and like the supporting industries around that I think are the ones that got hit the hardest and the longest. But I also think stand to win the most now in terms of I was reading an article a few months back about somebody was calling it the roaring 22s, and how everybody that's had money saved up and is now like not only has money put away to travel and they're going to use it to travel because all of a sudden they couldn't, but also I think for a lot of people, at least people that I've talked to as well, they had this mentality of like, oh, there's always time to go see this place. I'm always going to be able to go there. And all of a sudden, you weren't allowed to leave the United States. You weren't allowed to enter some of these places that you'd always wanted to go to, but figured you'd go to at some point later on. And so I think like travel is going to have a big comeback because now all of a sudden these people are like, oh my God, finally we can go somewhere. And I have to go to this place because like all like what if I can't go to it at some point. So I think you guys and a lot of other people who have been able to sort of ride this out stand to win big now because there's going to be a boom, and you guys are there to help that out. But sort of moving into, I know that you talked about the fact that you guys made your bags in China. You had a visit to China and that you've been working sort of with factories over there, as well as I know a lot of work, a lot of product manufacturing was happening in China. And one of the reports that I was reading in the beginning of the whole pandemic was how this could affect the Chinese manufacturing, because all of a sudden companies are going to begin to realize, oh, I'm overly dependent. Entire industries might realize they're overly dependent on China. Is that something that you guys have thought about as well? Or are you still looking at working with China? Are you sort of diversifying into where the bags are made? Just sort of what is your, viewpoint on that?
Yeah, we had actually started diversifying before the pandemic, but for different reasons. Early on, we were worried there was going to be like a supply issue because, started in China and stuff was shutting down there. We already had some orders and some products on their way. So, we thought we'd be okay for a while, but we're worried like, oh, what if we can't get any more product? But we'd started diversifying to Vietnam, which is kind of the other big bag producer internationally. Probably, I guess, a couple years before that, I'd been over there and visited some factories a few years before, and then we had just produced some of our first products in Vietnam. And the reason that kind of drove that change was the increased tariffs on imports from China under Trump administration. So for travel goods, which is like bags, suitcases, luggage, all that kind of stuff, it went from historically the duties were 17.6%. So, if you import a bag for whatever, let's say, you paid $100 to make it, you'd pay 17.60, basically to the US to be able to import it. So it went from 17.6% to 42.6. So it's kind of a big change in costs. So we were already dealing with that and didn't seem to be an end in sight there. So had already started diversifying to Vietnam, which didn't have those extra tariffs, just to be able to continue with like the kind of pricing structure and stuff we had built the business around previously. So we had already started down that path, and the tariffs are still in place. So we'll still continue down that path, and Vietnam's pretty much as good or better than China. A lot of companies,
especially in fabrics and
yeah, a lot of companies have been there for years. Like Patagonia's made
Nike,
stuff there
I think.
for years. Osprey, there's a bunch of brands that have been there for years, and most importantly, they have the rest of the supply chain is either there or nearby. It's one thing to do the actual, like usually the factory does, they call it like cut and sew. So they get material, they cut it, they sew it. But you also need to buy the zippers, buy the buckles, all the little pieces that go into it. And that infrastructure is there in Vietnam, whereas some of the other countries, like, of course, when the tariffs increased in China, a lot of those factories then started moving to like Myanmar, Cambodia, all these other places nearby. But the skills and expertise aren't there. The supply chains aren't there as much. So, maybe in the future, those will be a great place to make bags. But right now it's pretty much China and Vietnam if you want to do like really good quality and have the supply chains and everything there.
Speaking about bags, let's chat a little bit about the lineup and sort of, traveling with Tortuga. What are you currently traveling with in terms of bags? Like, what are your favorite bags in the Tortuga lineup? And like, what are you personally traveling with? Or when you could travel, I should say.
From when we started, I just keep like downsizing. I think like the first, when we first started working on a bag, it wasn't even carry-on sized. Then by the time we actually got to like deciding what to do and making it, we made a kind of max in the US carry-on size bag, which is 45 liters. Then I got used to that. Then we started downsize. So every time, like whenever you see us making a smaller bag, it's probably partially driven by me. So usually my go-to for trips is the Set Out Divide. So that's kind of like one of our smaller bags, but expands a little bit depth-wise. So it's good for me for like, if it's a short trip, I just, have it unexpanded and nice and small and slim. And then if it's a longer trip, I'll usually expand it out. So I have a little more space for, a couple extra t-shirts and socks and underwear and all that stuff. Usually that's my go-to. Right now, for this trip down here, I actually brought a discontinued product, the home-based backpack, because my closet's full of like, I never have like the correct current products. I always have kind of early samples or stuff we've discontinued. I always have a random mix. So that's one of my others that I travel with. And mostly I brought that one because it's super light and has decent, it's kind of like mid-size, so a little bit bigger. Give me a little more space to throw stuff in there because I'm down here for an unknown amount of time.
Yeah, I used to work for a denim, like a high-end denim company when I lived in Cincinnati. It was called Noble. It's a great company. They are not around anymore, but that was the best part about working at Noble was like you would get these like, like test run jeans that like didn't make it to, get sold, but they're like really cool. And like maybe there were like some like experimental things that they made that you kind of like people who worked there ended up kind of like getting as like a little side benefit. And that was like, I would always love that. It was kind of like having the insiders view on those companies, and those products. But what are your favorite, features to look for in a backpack, whether that is a Tortuga backpack or another backpack that you think is really good at what it does? Like, what are some of those features that you look for?
So usually what I tell people, and like, obviously we've built our, all of our products to these principles, but I think they actually are like, the reason we've done that is because we think that's actually what makes for a good travel bag. So a couple things that we start with are like carry-on sized, especially for our audience. People don't want to one, have a giant bag they got to lug around. They don't want to pay to check it. They don't want to wait a baggage claim. It's just like more to physically carry and more kind of mental baggage. So we're really big on the carry on only, and that's how I'd advise people to travel, even if that's like feels like a stretch for them, and they need to really cut down. I think that's worth it. The other thing that's big for travel and was kind of really what started us on the journey is having a bag that opens from the front. So usually it'll be called like front loading, panel loading, clamshell, something like that. But basically it opens from the front like a book or a suitcase rather than from the top like a hiking bag. And that just lets you kind of keep everything organized. You can grab whatever you need without having to pack and unpack everything else. It just kind of makes it easier and faster to do everything you're doing. And then the other ones for me personally are being comfortable. We've all had bags that were like destroying our shoulders or neck or whatever because of how they were designed or how we overpacked them or whatever. Comfort's always paramount, especially when you're traveling and you get the bag on all day going to the airport and wherever else. And then because of building bags for travel, where when you're using it, you're not home, basically. You might be on the other side of the world or at least, an hour away or something. So you want something that's durable because if it fails, it's going to suck because you can't get it replaced right that moment. And we experienced this because the very first day of our trip, Jeremy had bought a used bag from Craigslist. So we show up, we flew into Frankfurt, take the train from the airport, get to the hostel, we walk in, Jeremy throws his bag on the bed and the shoulder strap ripped off. I mean, it was like we had just checked in. You couldn't write it any better. So that was kind of a good lesson in like, it has to be really durable, not just because, obviously that's important for any product you're spending money on, but if it fails, it's just like way worse than something failing at home. And, you order another one from Amazon and have it in 2 days. Because if our stuff fails, then the rest of your trip sucks and you're blaming it on us and you're going to come home and be mad. And maybe you don't even want a replacement or a repair or refund because you now hate this brand. So for me, that's a big one just because like, if it fails, you're going to be mad about it. And if you bought some cheapo bag because you didn't want to spend money on your luggage or whatever, and it fails, like you're going to regret it and be mad at yourself. So like, you don't have to spend it on Tortuga, but like get a good quality bag if you're going to be traveling.
Yeah, I have to say, you talked about like the comfortability, and it's not something that I'd really thought about in terms of like the straps of a backpack that much. It's not something that I paid a lot of attention to until I got a Tortuga backpack, because I have to tell you, the straps on those backpacks are incredible. Even on like my big 45 liter that I have, yes, I pack it up and yes, it's heavy and it's only going to be so comfortable, but I think they do a phenomenal job of being comfortable at that weight. And I'm constantly so impressed with my daily bag, the one that I carry around with me all the time when I'm at home or when I'm traveling, is the 21 liter Outbreaker, the packable one, the day pack, and the straps on that are incredible. I talked to a friend into buying one of them recently because he was asking me about it, and I was like, put this on. Like, put it on and then put on your other bag and tell me how you feel. And he like literally that day bought one. So I do have to say you guys did an incredible job with the bag straps. What about like, what are some of the things that you take with you day to day, like everyday carry? That's like a big topic now. When you're going out to a coffee shop or you're traveling, what are the things that you kind of take with you every single day?
That's another one where I'm always trying to downsize. And in this case, it's because for whatever reason, I don't like stuff in my pockets. And,
Yep.
Women are lucky, or depends. You have to ask people. But, it is nice to have another bag. Like, if you're a woman and you have a purse, or if you're a guy, and like, I basically just always have that same Outbreaker day pack with me from carrying anything, because just hate having anything in my pockets other than I've got the wallet, keys, phone, the usual stuff in there. And then usually if I'm kind of out and about or working from somewhere other than home, I carry that same bag. I'll break a day pack. That's kind of my commuter bag, and I'll have my laptop in there, charger for laptop and phone, and then always have a notebook with me. Still do some stuff a little old school. It's nice to be able to shut the computer and still do something useful, or I'll kind of do like brainstorming, morning pages type stuff in there. So that's usually my setup. I keep it as simple as I can, and yeah, in the Bay Area, often an extra jacket or another layer because have weird variable climate there.
So this is a personal question in terms of like I'm personally burning to ask this question, but you kind of like, this is a nice segue into that. You mentioned you don't like to keep things in your pockets. I don't either, and I've become a big sling guy. Is there going to be a Tortuga sling anytime soon?
There will be. It's on the to-do list for we're kind of working on, we're calling it like V4. It's sort of the fourth generation of Tortuga products and of the business. So we'll reboot the travel backpacks first because that's kind of the bread and butter. And then once we get into the kind of smaller accessories like the day pack, Sling is for sure on there. I think there has been a big renaissance of those. You aren't the only one. It started, I think, with some of the outdoor brands doing kind of rebranding fanny packs as slings and hip packs, I think was kind of the language. And now, yeah, in streetwear, you started seeing the slings like kind of worn over one shoulder on the chest or back or whatever. And yeah, now it feels like it's a real category again. We finally like bounced back from, I don't know, whatever uncool stigma there was for that kind of bag. So
I think it was
yeah.
hipsters, man. I think hipsters picked up their parents' fanny packs from the 80s and were like, all right, how do I make this cool? And they, started wearing it across their chest and now it's cool. And, which I'm actually okay with because like I said, I don't want to have a backpack with me all the time because it's just an overkill sometimes, but you still want to have a little bit of stuff with you. And I think that a sling is a great, solution for that. And I'm still looking for the perfect sling, man. I'm still
so let's do some product research. What do you
perfect.
What do you carry in your sling?
So I always have my wallet. I don't like to put my phone in my sling because it's just, I don't know, I put that in my back pocket. Sometimes I will have a battery bank and a cord to charge that. I like to keep a pen in there in case I have to like sign anything. Now I have a little, so I have this Topo Designs, the mini one that I use in my tech pouch. I put all of that stuff in there, but I don't bring this with me. But I have the minier one, the smaller one, in which I keep some I keep like gum in there, hand sanitizer, just these, chapstick things I don't necessarily use all the time, but might need, and that goes in there, and sunglasses. And those are kind of like my must-haves. But yeah, like I said, sometimes I bring my charger and a cord, just depending on how long I'm gonna be out for.
You don't carry your tablet or computer or anything in there, right?
No, I have thought about like a bigger. I think Nomadic has a sling that can fit an iPad, but that's almost like I would have to have that and like a sling. But no, I wouldn't. If I was bringing my iPad, I would just bring my backpack, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I see the bigger ones like that can carry a computer, but it feels like, yeah, starting to be overkill, or that at least that's a different product. There could be like a computer sling and a kind of pockets sling, or like a purse equivalent sort of sling.
And for me, it's like I'm always looking for, and probably people listening as well, it's like I'm looking for things that can fill multiple uses, right? And so if it's something that has like one very specific use that I'm only gonna like essentially like reach for once a month, I'm not gonna bring it with me, right? So I think who came out with a sling recently that I thought was interesting. I haven't got my hands on it, but you're familiar with Pact
Yeah.
and their collaboration with Chase Reeves.
Mm-hmm.
They did an interesting thing where the sling are the hip straps. And I thought that was interesting. I thought the actual sling looked a little goofy, but I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah, I've seen a couple like that where it's sort of can be the bottom chunk almost of the bag or the hip belt, and then turn into a sling. I don't know. I don't know what ours will be like. I think we'll approach it like some of our other accessories as like, this is kind of your secondary bag, or I guess that could even be a third one, right? It doesn't have to be a personal item exactly, but that's kind of a secondary bag, and you're going to use it for when you're out and about in a destination. And then from there, it's basically figuring out, what I just asked you of like, okay, you're running around for the day and you're, let's say, not carrying your laptop. You're just kind of sightseeing, hanging out, whatever. What do you want in that bag? And then what can we do to make that kind of easy and convenient and comfortable to carry.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting, like I just had this conversation with a friend about like the evolution of people's like carry, right? Like when I got started, I was one backpack guy, right? Like I was like one backpack and I was stuffing everything in there, and I was only bringing one pair of shoes, et cetera, et cetera. And then the more that we've become, my wife and I, like, we've become far more like home bases. Like we have home bases that we go to, and then like we might take like little trips around. We've started bringing more stuff. And even now we're having the discussion of like, hey, I think we're at this point where we need to upgrade to a rolling suitcase and then still have like a carry-on that's not huge, smaller, a little bit easier to go around with, because like I don't want to do the turtle thing where you do the one backpack here and then the other backpack in the front.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm approaching 30 now. I'm getting a little too old to be doing that. So it's almost like advancing to that point. So what are some of your favorite locations, as you were running Tortuga remotely? I know that you still spend quite a bit of time in the Bay Area, but when you were kind of full-time remote, what were some of your favorite locations to travel to as a digital nomad and entrepreneur?
Yeah, I feel like mine are always a little skewed by the experience there, and then like also a lot of places that I've gone for work. So back when I was at Google, I tried to take advantage of any travel that we were allowed to do there. So got to visit a lot of clients, and then I also did a couple programs there that were kind of like basically like study abroad but working abroad. So spent 3 months in Sydney, Australia on assignment, which was pretty rad. And I've always had like a very soft spot for Australia and Sydney since I got to actually spend enough time to, feel like the place a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, got to travel around from there. So that one's always a favorite. And then one of my other favorites was like for whenever we'd go to China for either trade shows or visiting factories and stuff, I would usually go through Hong Kong, fly into there, spend a couple days there. Obviously, that's like big hub airport, a little easier to fly into. And I've really loved Hong Kong, and I think it's just because I've gone back there a bunch of times and gotten to like do a bunch of stuff. Ended up knowing and meeting some people who lived there, so had a little bit of a network to plug into whenever I would visit. And I just love the energy of those kind of like big giant cities like that. I don't know how long I could take that level if I could live there like half time or full time, but it was like a perfect place to pass through and spend a couple days, eat some awesome food, see some people I already knew, and then kind of get to work with the factories.
Mm. What does, kind of wrapping up, I love to hear what people's days look like, because I think that's one of the things that people struggle with in like, thinking about working remotely. Sounds like a great idea, but then you realize that you have all this freedom and you don't really know how to structure your day because no one's structuring it for you, right? So what does a regular day look like for you in terms of work?
So right now I don't have regular days because I'm sort of right now I'm sitting at the kind of kitchen counter talking to you and working, and spend some time doing that. Then I do a little DIY type stuff trying to get the house ready here. So I'm using a drill, then I'm back to the computer. So right now is probably not a good example. My usual days though, I actually like to keep pretty routine and structured. I think that's one of those things you kind of figure out over time. Like when you first go remote, it's like freedom. I'll do whatever I want.
Right.
I'll wear sweatpants and sleep in and whatever cliches people think they're going to be excited about. But then you realize like, oh, if I actually want to do good work and be focused and stuff, you need to have good setup and good routines. So when I'm home, I actually have an office that I rent, which is like 2 blocks from our apartment. So walk 2 blocks to work. Very tough commute. And yeah, I generally my structure is like I'm kind of a morning person, so I like to get up, get to work, kind of as soon as I can, and do all my big stuff in the morning. So if I have to write and anything that's like brain work and real thinking, try to do in the morning. Then after lunch, I'll go to the gym like 3 days a week or so. And that's kind of a nice like afternoon break for me. So, when maybe your energy is a little flagging after lunch and in the afternoon, that's when I like to take a break just to like kind of, I don't know, break up the pattern so I don't I'm not just like sitting there, passing time doing bad work. And then it also just kind of energizes me a bit. And then I also repeat that to like everyone on our team and everyone we hire to be like, hey, I'm leaving for an hour in the middle of the day to go to the gym. Like, this is an okay thing to do. So I think it's good in terms of setting an example. And then I'll come back and just kind of finish out the day with any, emails, just sort of routine stuff you got to do. And yeah, it ends up being like a fairly typical sounding, I think, work day, aside from like the flexibility to, take lunch whenever or, break for the gym. But I think it's also a good, I don't know, it keeps me productive. I feel like I like the routine so that kind of stuff I'm just not thinking about, and I can, focus on my work when I'm at work and then get out when I'm done. So yeah, I think I keep kind of a like fairly normal schedule, which I think a lot is where a lot of people end up, but no one starts there because you just want to take advantage of the freedom, which is totally normal.
For sure. I know that you mentioned that there's kind of like a V4 of Tortuga coming, but what can people expect? Like, what can we look forward to from Tortuga over the next year and kind of keep our eyes out for?
Yeah. So basically kind of moving from like the pre and pandemic era to like the next version of the business. So trying to use this as a time where it's like not just bad things happening, but hopefully it'll be more like when there's a forest fire and like some of the forest burns down, but then it grows back healthier. That's kind of what we want to do with the business. So yeah, we're going to be kind of simplifying a lot of the line that we do and kind of focused on one collection, doing a big update to that, which is the Outbreaker. It's now the Outbreaker Collection.
When is that coming out? When is the update coming?
We're early days right now, so I always tell people it takes a year, but hopefully early next year would be the goal. So kind of updating, evolving sort of the main products there, travel backpack, and then we'll get into the day pack, the slings, all the accessories, like we were saying. And probably before then, we'll have working on a new website right now and just kind of rebooting like a little bit of everything that we do, and taking this as a time to see, okay, what should we stop doing in the business? What should we do more of? What can we do better? And what should we just like not be in the business of? So yeah, doing a lot of resets on our side. Most of that won't be that visible. But yeah, new products, and I've been sharing some of that stuff on Instagram. So if you want to see kind of early sketches, and some people, especially bag nerds like yourself, like to kind of follow along and see like, oh, that's, you start out with this sketch and then it's this, and then next thing you know, there's a product. So yeah, if that journey is interesting, yeah, check us out on Instagram. I'm trying to share more of that stuff and behind the scenes type things like that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Where can people find out more about Tortuga? Where can they go buy backpacks? If somebody's listening and you need backpacks right now, you're gearing up to head back to Europe. I heard some announcements recently. Europe's opening up. A lot of countries are opening up. Where can they go find out and buy some of the backpacks?
Yeah, we're just at tortugabackpacks.com. So Tortuga. It's the Spanish word for turtle. Make sure you put an S at the end for backpacks, or just Google it. We're hard to miss. And yeah, check it out. Depending on when this goes up, we've got a summer sale going for a couple of our collections. So yeah, we're clearing out some old inventory, helping people make it a little easier on people to get a new bag and get ready to travel again. So trying to do our part and spark a little travel boom here.
So to give people kind of like an easy call to action, I think this would be interesting. What bag do you think should be the first bag that if they're interested, they want to go check out, the website and kind of browse around? What would be the bag that's kind of like your favorite, or the one that you suggest that they go check out first?
Yeah, I would say start with the Outbreaker backpack. That's kind of our top of the line, really cool technical materials that were actually made originally for racing sailboats, and now we've kind of adapted them for bags. So not an obvious connection, but some pretty cool stuff there. They'll also adjust to your height. So if you're a little shorter or taller, you're kind of like at either end of the spectrum and have a tough time fitting gear like that. That'll typically be better. And if you check that out and you think it's overkill, then try the next one would be the set out backpack, which is kind of our, we call it like the Goldilocks bag, but it's sort of like right in the middle, just right for most people. If you don't want the like super fancy high tech stuff. So that's kind of the number two option if Outbreaker's not right for you.
Yeah, I suggest the Outbreaker. I have the Set Out 45, and I wish I'd gotten the Outbreaker 45 originally. But I would say if anybody's listening to this and they're looking for a good daily backpack and then one that transitions really well to travel with, the Outbreaker day pack is incredible. I did a video review of it. So if anybody wants to see that, I'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, I love that backpack both for daily carry and for travel. But Fred, thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate it. I love everything you guys are doing, and best of luck with everything at Tortuga.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This was fun.